Good evening. I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Welcome to Truth Report. Tonight we're bringing you 4 interconnected stories that reveal something deeply troubling about global power structures in 2026. From a maritime disaster in the Philippines to the most dramatic military purge in modern Chinese history, to a Pentagon policy shift that's rewriting 7 decades of Pacific security doctrine.
These aren't isolated incidents. By the end of this show, you're going to see how they connect to paint a picture of a world order rapidly destabilizing. Let's start with breaking news from the southern Philippines, where a ferry disaster has left at least 15 people dead and 28 still missing as of this broadcast.
The MV Tricia Kirsten 3 capsized just after midnight Monday, January 26, according to multiple reports from U.S. News, https://www.usnews.com/news/world/articles/7 killed scores missing as passenger ferry capsizes off southern Philippines, and Al Jazeera, https://www.aljazeera.com/news/2026/1/26/ferry-carrying-over-350-sinks-killing-at-least-7. The inter-island ferry was carrying 332 passengers and 27 crew members, traveling from Zamboanga City to Jolo Island in Sulu Province. At least 316 people have been rescued so far.
Now here's what's critical. According to GMA News Network, https://www.gmanework.com/news/top story/region/dead as Roro vessel sinks off Basilan rescue ops ongoing for survivors/story/. The Philippine Coast Guard cleared this vessel before it left Zamboanga port. There was no sign of overloading. The weather was good. The ferry sank approximately 1 nautical mile from the island village of Baluk in Basilan province. So what happened? That's the $15 million question, and it leads us into a much darker pattern.
Let's talk about the Philippines' maritime safety record, because this isn't an anomaly. This is a pattern that's been killing people for decades. According to the International Maritime Organization, the Philippines held a domestic ferry safety conference specifically to address their abysmal safety record. And when you dig into the history of ferry disasters in the Philippines, https://newsinfo.inquirer.net/46763/history-of-ferry-disasters-in-the-Philippines, the scale is staggering.
The Dona Paz disaster in December 1987 remains the world's deadliest peacetime shipping accident. An official passenger manifest recorded 1,493 passengers and 59 crew members. But the ferry was estimated to be carrying close to 4,000 people when it collided with an oil tanker off Mindoro Island. More than 4,300 people died, Maya. That's more than the Titanic times 3.
And it didn't stop there. The Princess of the Stars sailed into a typhoon in June 2008 and tipped over near the coast of Sibuyan Island. Only 57 survived out of 850 on board. The Dona Marilyn sank off the central island of Leyte in October 1988, leaving more than 250 dead. According to Relief Web, https://reliefweb/report/philippines/ferry-disaster-spurs-government-review-maritime-safety-laws, there have been 25 significant ferry accidents involving loss of life since 1980.
Now here's where it gets interesting. The Maritime Industry Authority, Marina, investigated 214 accidents at sea in 2021. That's the most in 5 years and more than double the number investigated the year before. So the problem is getting worse, not better. Marina is supposed to be the highest policy-making body on maritime safety. They conduct inspections once a year to determine seaworthiness. Once a year, Maya.
And that inspection clearly isn't sufficient to ensure ships are properly equipped with life vests, fire extinguishers, and other safety provisions. The contributing factors haven't changed in 40 years. Overloading of vessels well above the limits imposed by maritime authorities. Poor maintenance. Lax enforcement of safety regulations. The same systemic failures, killing people over and over again.
So who benefits from this negligence? Let's follow the money. Ferry operators maximize profits by packing vessels beyond capacity. They cut costs by delaying maintenance. They pay off inspectors or exploit weak regulatory oversight. Marina conducts one annual inspection that clearly isn't catching these violations. And the people who pay the price are working-class Filipinos who depend on these inter-island ferries because they have no other option.
The government proposes laws after every disaster. They talk about holding shipowners and operators liable. They promise to tighten safety requirements, upgrade the Philippine Coast Guard. But enforcement remains weak because the political will doesn't exist to challenge the ferry operators who have money and influence. This is structural violence, Alex. Predictable. Preventable. And it keeps happening.
According to Baird Maritime, https://www.bairdmaritime.com/passenger/ferry/column-improving-ferry-safety-in-the-wet-detective, ferry fatalities in the Philippines have gradually fallen from highest in the world to being closer to the global average during the current decade. But, closer to the global average still means people are dying in disasters that shouldn't happen. The Inter-Ferry Ferry Safe project has been studying safety advances to develop best practice guidance for developing nations. But guidance doesn't save lives if it's not enforced.
And this connects to our broader theme tonight. Who enforces international maritime safety standards when national governments fail? Who holds corrupt officials accountable? In theory, international bodies like the IMO. In practice, enforcement depends on national political will and resources that countries like the Philippines often lack. Which brings us to our second major story, and it's a bombshell.
China's top-ranking general is under investigation in what analysts are calling the most dramatic military purge since the Cultural Revolution. And when I say top-ranking, I mean the number 2 figure in China's entire armed forces, right after Xi Jinping himself.
Zhang Youxia, first vice-chairman of the Central Military Commission and member of the Politburo, is under investigation for suspected serious discipline violations and violations of the law, according to NPR. https://www.npr.org/2026/01/24/G-S1-1072110/China's-top-general-under- investigation-in-latest-military-purge, and The Irish Times. https://www.irishtimescom/world/Asia-Pacific//top Chinese general investigated for corruption amid escalation of military purge/. Along with him, Zhenli, chief of the PLA's Joint Staff Department, is also under investigation. This is unprecedented.
Let me emphasize what's happening here. Zhang Youxia was Xi Jinping's closest military ally. His father fought alongside Xi's father under Mao Zedong during China's civil war. This is a man with revolutionary credentials going back generations. A member of the Politburo, the top decision-making body of the Communist Party. And he's being investigated for corruption.
According to CNN, https://edition.cnn.com/2026/01/24/China/China-general-under-investigation-ANTL-HNK, the Central Military Commission usually has 7 members. With Zhang and Liu under investigation, that leaves the CMC with just 2, Xi Jinping, who chairs the body, and Zhang Shengmin, the disciplinary chief of the PLA. Former CIA analyst Christopher K. Johnson called the probing of Zhang an unprecedented move in the history of the Chinese military, noting it represents the total annihilation of the High Command.
The total annihilation of the High Command. Let that sink in. Xi Jinping has systematically removed every senior general in the People's Liberation Army. This isn't just an anti-corruption campaign. This is a consolidation of absolute power over the military. And it's happening right now.
The Diplomat, https://thediplomat.com/2026/01/the-purge-of-Zhang-Yuxia-and-Lu-next-for-China's-military, published an analysis titled The Purge of Zhang Youxia and Lu Zhenli, Why and What's Next for China's Military. They describe the PLA as being in a major crisis, with a level of leadership instability unseen since the heyday of the Cultural Revolution. Zhang and Liu were the only remaining generals in the CMC with actual combat experience, having fought against Vietnam in the late 1970s. That was the last time China went to war.
So Xi has purged his entire military leadership, including the men with combat experience. The PLA Daily, the military's official newspaper, suggested in an editorial that Zhang and Liu were not only accused of corruption but were undermining Xi's authority over the PLA. Which raises a critical question: were they actually corrupt, or did they represent a challenge to Xi's control?
We need to look at the broader context. The anti-corruption campaign has been a central feature of Xi's leadership since 2012. According to Fox News, https://www.foxnews.com/world/China's-top-general-investigation-latest-military-purge, Communist Party disciplinary bodies punished 983,000 people in 2025. That's almost 1 million people punished in a single year. This is a massive purge of anyone who might pose a threat to Xi's authority.
Analysts quoted by NPR believe the purges are designed both to reform the military and to ensure loyalty to Xi Jinping. But let's be clear about what ensuring loyalty means in an authoritarian context. It means eliminating any general who might question orders. Any commander who might resist using military force in ways that violate international law. Any officer who retains institutional loyalty to the PLA as an institution rather than personal loyalty to Xi.
This is particularly concerning given the timing. China is facing economic challenges. Youth unemployment is high. There's growing public dissatisfaction with Xi's zero-COVID policy legacy and his handling of the economy. Historically, authoritarian leaders facing domestic pressure often deflect by manufacturing external conflicts. Taiwan, the South China Sea, border disputes with India.
And now she has a military leadership that owes everything to him personally. No independent power base. No combat experience to give them credibility with the troops. No institutional loyalty that might cause them to hesitate if she orders aggressive military action. From a strategic perspective, this makes China more dangerous, not less. A military purge of this scale creates instability and unpredictability.
Which leads directly to our third story. The Pentagon has released a new national defense strategy document that fundamentally alters U.S. security commitments in the Pacific. And the timing, given what's happening in China, is deeply troubling.
According to Fox News, https://www.foxnews.com/politics/pentagon-plans-give-south-korea-north-korea-threats-new-strategy, and the Spokesman Review, https://www.spokesman.com/stories/2026/jan/233/pentagon-4sees-more-limited-role-in-deterring-n, the Pentagon foresees a more limited role in deterring North Korea, with South Korea taking primary responsibility. This is outlined in a 25-page document titled Restoring Peace Through Strength for a New Golden Age of America.
Let me read you the exact language from the Pentagon document. South Korea is capable of taking primary responsibility for deterring North Korea with critical but more limited U.S. support. The justification is that South Korea has a powerful military, supported by high defense spending, a robust defense industry, and mandatory conscription. The document states this shift is consistent with America's interest in updating U.S. force posture on the Korean peninsula.
Now, South Korea currently hosts about 28,500 U.S. troops as part of combined defense against North Korea's military threat. Seoul has raised its defense budget by 7.5% for this year. So yes, South Korea has a capable military. But here's what the Pentagon document isn't saying: this policy shift is really about burden sharing and prioritizing defense of the U.S. homeland.
The policy change appears in a section titled Increased Burden Sharing with U.S. Allies and Partners. It also addresses deterring China through strength, not confrontation. What the Pentagon is actually saying is, we want our allies to carry more of the defense burden so we can focus resources elsewhere. This is a fundamental retreat from 70 years of U.S. security commitments in the Pacific.
And South Korea's response has been carefully diplomatic. According to reporting from Dev Discourse, https://www.devdiscourse.com/article/headlines/3780955-pentagon's-strategic-shift-south-korea-and-deterrence, South Korea's defense ministry emphasized that U.S. military forces based in the country are the core of the alliance that has deterred North Korean aggression. They said they'll be cooperating closely with the U.S. to continue developing the alliance. But read between the lines, Maya.
South Korea is terrified. They're facing an increasingly unstable North Korea with nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. China is undergoing a massive military purge that's creating strategic unpredictability. And now the United States is signaling it wants to reduce its role in providing the security umbrella that has prevented war on the peninsula for 70 years. This is exactly the wrong signal to send at exactly the wrong time.
Let's talk about who benefits from this policy shift. From the Trump administration's perspective, this is about reducing American military commitments abroad and forcing allies to pay more for their own defense. It plays well domestically to voters who don't want U.S. troops stationed overseas. But the strategic implications are enormous.
North Korea benefits because it reduces the American deterrent effect. If the U.S. is signaling it wants a more limited role, that emboldens North Korea to be more aggressive. China benefits because it weakens the U.S.-South Korea alliance at exactly the moment when Xi Jinping has consolidated absolute control over the PLA. Russia benefits because anything that weakens U.S. alliances globally serves Russian interests.
And here's the connection to our first story about the Philippines ferry disaster. The Philippines is also a U.S. treaty ally under the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951. If the U.S. is reducing commitments to South Korea, what message does that send to the Philippines about American willingness to honor its security commitments? What message does it send to Japan, to Australia, to Taiwan?
This is the pattern we're seeing across all four stories tonight. Weakening of international institutions and norms. National governments failing to protect their own citizens, whether from maritime disasters or military aggression. Authoritarian consolidation of power in China. And American retreat from global security commitments that have prevented major wars for decades.
Let's bring this full circle. The ferry disaster in the Philippines killed 15 people and counting because of systemic regulatory failure and corruption. The Chinese military purge is eliminating checks on Xi Jinping's authority over the PLA, creating strategic instability. The Pentagon policy shift is signaling American retreat from Pacific security commitments at the worst possible moment. These aren't isolated incidents.
They're symptoms of a global order that's breaking down. International institutions like the IMO can't enforce maritime safety standards without national political will. The United Nations can't constrain authoritarian leaders who've consolidated absolute power over their militaries. And U.S. security guarantees that prevented World War III for 70 years are being questioned by the very administration that's supposed to uphold them.
According to The Washington Post, https://www.washingtonpost.com/national-security/2026/01/25/China-military-purge-Zhang-Youxia-11, Zhang Youxia's purge represents Xi Jinping achieving sole operational command of the People's Liberation Army. This is happening while China faces economic challenges and growing domestic dissatisfaction. Historically, this is exactly when authoritarian regimes manufacture external conflicts to rally nationalist support.
And the U.S. is signaling it wants allies to take primary responsibility for their own defense right when China is becoming more unpredictable and North Korea continues developing nuclear weapons. The strategic timing couldn't be worse. This policy shift doesn't just affect the Korean peninsula. It affects every U.S. ally in the Indo-Pacific region who's watching to see if American security commitments are still credible.
Let's talk about what happens next. In the Philippines, there will be another investigation into the ferry disaster. The government will promise reforms. And in a few years, there will be another disaster because the underlying corruption and weak enforcement haven't changed. Unless Filipino citizens demand accountability from their government and international bodies actually enforce maritime safety standards.
In China, Xi Jinping now has unprecedented control over the PLA. The entire military leadership has been purged and replaced with officers who owe their positions entirely to Xi personally. This makes the PLA more loyal to Xi but potentially less capable as a fighting force and more likely to follow orders for aggressive military action without institutional resistance. The risk of conflict over Taiwan or in the South China Sea has increased significantly.
And in South Korea, the government is going to have to make hard choices about defense spending and military preparedness. They can't rely on the U.S. security umbrella the way they have for 70 years. Which means either dramatically increasing their defense budget, potentially pursuing their own nuclear weapons program, or accepting increased vulnerability to North Korean aggression. None of those options are good.
Here's what we need to understand. The post-World War II international order was built on institutions like the United Nations, the International Maritime Organization, and security alliances like the U.S.-South Korea Mutual Defense Treaty. These institutions and alliances prevented great power wars and provided frameworks for international cooperation. They weren't perfect, but they worked reasonably well for decades.
That order is breaking down right now. International institutions lack enforcement power when national governments don't cooperate. Authoritarian leaders are consolidating power without effective checks. And the United States under the Trump administration is actively retreating from the global leadership role it's played since 1945. We're entering uncharted territory.
The ferry disaster in the Philippines is a microcosm of this larger pattern. International standards exist. The IMO has guidelines. The Manila Statement acknowledges the urgent need to enhance safety of passenger ferries. But if the Philippine government doesn't enforce those standards because of corruption or lack of resources, people die. And there's no higher authority that can force compliance.
Same dynamic with China's military purge. International law prohibits aggressive war. The UN Charter prohibits the use of force except in self-defense. But if Xi Jinping orders the PLA to invade Taiwan, who's going to stop him? The UN Security Council where China has veto power. The United States, which is signaling it wants to reduce military commitments abroad. This is how wars start.
And the Pentagon policy shift on North Korea deterrence is particularly troubling because it's happening simultaneously with China's military purge. South Korea is caught between an increasingly unpredictable China and a nuclear-armed North Korea, while its primary security guarantor is talking about taking a more limited role. This is a recipe for strategic miscalculation.
Let's be absolutely clear about what's at stake here. The Korean War killed over 3 million people between 1950 and 1953. The armistice that ended active fighting has held for 70 years precisely because of the U.S. military presence and the credibility of American security commitments. If North Korea believes the U.S. won't intervene in a conflict, the risk of another war dramatically increases.
And if China believes the U.S. won't defend Taiwan, the risk of a Chinese invasion increases. Taiwan is the world's leading producer of advanced semiconductors. A war over Taiwan would devastate the global economy and potentially escalate into a great power conflict. This isn't hypothetical. These are real risks that are increasing because of the policy decisions being made right now.
So what do we do? First, we need to demand accountability from our own government. American voters need to understand what's being done in their name. The Pentagon document talks about restoring peace through strength for a new golden age of America, but withdrawing from security commitments doesn't create strength. It creates power vacuums that authoritarian regimes will fill.
Second, we need to support international institutions even when they're imperfect. The IMO can't enforce maritime safety standards without member states cooperating, but that doesn't mean we abandon international standards. It means we pressure governments like the Philippines to actually enforce the regulations that exist. We demand accountability when corrupt officials let ferry operators pack vessels beyond capacity.
Third, we need to understand that these stories are connected. The breakdown of international norms and institutions affects everything from maritime safety to military alliances. When the Trump administration signals American retreat from global leadership, it's not just about reducing military commitments. It's about whether we still believe in international cooperation to solve collective problems.
And fourth, we need to watch what happens next very carefully. Xi Jinping has consolidated control over the Chinese military at exactly the moment when China faces domestic economic challenges. The US is reducing security commitments in the Pacific. North Korea has nuclear weapons. These are the conditions that historically have led to major wars. We need to be clear-eyed about the risks.
According to the research we've compiled tonight, ferry fatalities in the Philippines have fallen from the highest in the world to closer to the global average, but that's not good enough when the disasters are preventable. The Chinese military purge represents total annihilation of the high command, according to former CIA analysts, creating unprecedented instability. And the Pentagon policy shift fundamentally alters 70 years of Pacific security doctrine. Each story alone is significant. Together, they paint a picture of a world order in crisis.
The pattern is clear. International institutions are weakening. Authoritarian leaders are consolidating power. Democratic allies are being told to fend for themselves. And the United States is retreating from global leadership. This doesn't end well unless citizens in democratic countries demand better from their governments.
We started tonight by saying these 4 stories would reveal something about global power structures in 2026. Here's what they reveal: the post-World War II international order that prevented great power wars for 8 decades is breaking down. And we're not building anything coherent to replace it. Just power vacuums, strategic instability, and weakened alliances at exactly the moment when we need strong international cooperation.
15 people are dead from a ferry disaster that didn't have to happen. China's entire military leadership has been purged to ensure loyalty to one man. South Korea is being told to take primary responsibility for deterring nuclear-armed North Korea. These aren't isolated tragedies. They're symptoms of system failure at the global level.
So here's our call to action: pay attention. These stories matter. The decisions being made in Beijing and Washington and Manila right now will determine whether we see major wars in the next decade. Whether international institutions can still function. Whether democratic alliances can hold together when authoritarians test them. This is the most consequential moment in global politics since the end of the Cold War.
Stay informed. Demand accountability. Support journalism that connects the dots between seemingly unrelated stories to show you the bigger picture. Because that bigger picture is troubling, and citizens in democratic countries need to understand what's happening before it's too late to change course.
I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. This has been Truth Report. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth matters, especially when powerful people want you to ignore it.